Last week I talked to you about the idea that the cross of Calvary is not something from long ago and far away, but rather something that can be present in your life today, and it usually is present during those times that are most difficult for us. During times when we are grieving, or if we are sick, or if we are struggling with compassion for someone else's suffering, or if we are experiencing failure or disappointment, or if in a time when we recognize how sinful we are, if we meet those times with the power of the cross of Calvary, that is to say, the conviction that God is with us, God loves us mightily, and God will bless us even through grief and sorrow and guilt and sin. If we know that in those difficult times, then the cross is here with us today, and all of its power is opened up into our lives. Today I want to tell you about something else that can be a reality in your daily living, and it's something else which at times we push off to the side as if it is merely an historical event. And that is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Many of us were brought up to think that the resurrection is just a historical event that happened a long time ago and in a place far, far away. And we know that if we believe in it as an historical event, then we will be saved. And I'm here to tell you this morning, that's not enough. If the resurrection of Christ is something that happened a long time ago and far away, that is not enough to change your life. I know it's a difficult thing for us because we were all, at least those of us who were brought up in mainline churches, were brought up with that belief. And we were told, if you believe in this as an historical event, you are a Christian. If you don't believe in it, you're going to hell. And after you've told a child that about 10,000 times, whether they like it or not, they start to believe it. I'm here today to tell you, open your eyes to the resurrection. I want you to see it as something different. I want you to see it as a reality for your life today, and something that exists in your heart and your soul and changes everything about your life. I want to talk about how our belief in the resurrection came to be the center of the Christian faith. When did we first talk about the resurrection, and when did we first realize that everything hinges upon it? And to do that, we have to go back to my favorite biblical characters, to those fishermen. Particularly the first four whom Jesus called, James and John, the sons of thunder, and then the other set of brothers, Simon and Andrew. Remember their lives in that little town called Bethsaida, fish town, and what was going through their heads and what kind of faith they had in their relationship with God up until the point when they met Jesus. To them, God was angry. God was a God to whom we continually had to make sacrifices in order to appease his wrath. God was a God who didn't care about poor and sick people. In fact, those fishermen had been raised to believe that if you were poor and sick, it's because God hated you and was punishing you. They had been raised to believe that God didn't care for the outcasts, for the lepers, or the tax collectors, or the prostitutes. They were all sinful people, and God despised them. So they were brought up in this dark shadow of an overbearing, angry, sacrifice-demanding God who had no love and no compassion whatsoever. Now I want to clarify something. That should not have been the way at all, and that is not the way that the New or the Old Testament portrays God. If they had been taught properly from the Old Testament, they would have learned about the God of Amos and Hosea and Zechariah and Isaiah, and they would have known that God was infinitely compassionate. But the church had been corrupted in their era, so all they had was this dark, angry God. Then along comes this Jesus, and Jesus brings to them a message, and a message that comes with great power. Jesus comes to them and says to them, "Do you not know who God is? God is abundantly merciful. God is filled with compassion. God is gracious and loving and kind." And then they follow this man out to where there were sick and broken people. And instead of condemning those people, Jesus reached out to them and touched them and proclaimed God's healing mercy for them, and their lives were changed. And then Jesus led them to where there were tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners, and Christ reached out and touched and changed their lives, saying, "God is with you. God is merciful. You are beloved of God." And everything began to change for James and John and Simon and Andrew and all the other disciples who had been brought up in darkness. And for the next 3 years, they lived their lives in the dazzling light of God's presence. Healing and mercy and grace and peace flowed abundantly, and everything changed for them, and they were lifted up to these new levels of wonder and of glory.